Hi, everybody. Matt Yankovic here, head of open source strategy at Percona, to ask you for your help. If you haven't seen, our annual open source data management survey is out and available. You can see the link here if you want to head on over to SurveyMonkey and check that out. It would really help us out in the community if you did. If you're not familiar with this survey, basically we're looking for what are the trends happening in the open source space, specifically the open source database space. We touch a little bit on Kubernetes. We touch a little bit on a few other things. If you could take maybe 5 to 10 minutes to fill it out, it is anonymous and all the data is made available to everyone else. So it's not a Percona survey. It is a community survey, and all of that data is freely available with no PII. So we would really encourage you to jump on over, fill it out. It does help us out. It helps us set our internal direction, but I know many other companies out there also use the same data for helping their open source projects and where they invest and spend time, money, and effort. So it would really help both of us out. It would really help out the community if you could do that. Now, real quick, let me go ahead and show you the survey. If you want to watch me go through it and explain the different questions, it'll take a few minutes. But I would appreciate if you're interested, you hanging out. So, here we are on the survey page. Again, this is designed to be kind of lightweight. There are about 30 questions total, so it will take you 5 to 10 minutes. But I mentioned that there is no PII, so we do ask you to self kind of fill in some of these. So, what country you live in, just so we know, where folks are responding from, because what we found, quite honestly, is the needs of people in, let's say, Europe are very different than the needs of people in Asia when it comes to open source, especially their usage. So that's important as well. Which kind of company industry you work for. Again, if you prefer not to answer, that's okay. You can click that I prefer not to answer one. We'll allow you to do that. Same thing here with the size of your company. One of the things that we always do with our survey results, internally, and we publish this data, but other companies and users of this data have also done, is they'll look at large organizations versus small versus medium. And so it's super helpful to get that information because you start to realize, maybe big corporations use more Postgres, whereas smaller corporations use more, Postgres or more. I don't know. I mean, part of this is figuring that out. So helpful there. What kind of role do you have? Again, some of the questions when we talk about licensing, how you use open source, it's interesting to see the breakdown between what DBA says versus developer versus someone in management. There are vast differences in a lot of cases how those questions are answered. So, go ahead and fill that one out as well. And this is an interesting question that we have added a couple of years ago. Who chooses the database technology? And over the last few years, we've seen the trend that's happening is more and more developers and architects are being the decision makers for which database technologies, as opposed to having just, a DBA or management say, we are an Oracle shop. So very interesting question for us, and it helps to kind of set that, who are making those decisions now. And so, please fill that one out if you get a chance. Do you have dedicated DBAs or database specialists? Again, a trend that we're seeing is less and less dedicated DBAs, more and more SREs, more and more developers managing databases. So we want to understand, is that trend continuing? Is it accelerating? What's going on? How many different database instances? Again, this one is very interesting because what it enables us to do is look at larger environments versus smaller environments. Again, maybe larger environments have DBAs, smaller environments don't. Those are the types of trends that help everybody set kind of their agendas and who they're focused on building tools for and what sort of things are out there. But one of the things that we found the last couple of years is the size of the environments is getting larger and larger. So every year over year, you're seeing 10, 20% jumps. Good data to have. What kind of database technologies do you deploy? So there's so many different databases out there. So, are you using just relational? Are you using analytics? Do you have time series databases? All of these different, database technologies that are out there are often deployed side by side. So understanding, how many are deployed together is a really interesting trend for us. And it's something that, again, you start to see companies look for what kind of partnerships might make sense with that data, right? So, if graph databases and, queuing and streaming software always goes hand in hand, that's an interesting data point, and that can, impact, some people's decisions. If you're using MySQL or not, you can choose the not. Which versions are you using? Again, the more detail you can provide, the better. But if you just want to put, hey, you're just using MySQL, you can do that as well. Again, this helps us track trends and what we're doing, internally, but also what other folks are doing and how they're trending up or down. What we've seen in the last few years is MySQL is very stable. It's got a very big audience, a very broad audience. And so that broad audience has definitely continued to kind of stay, up and down a little bit, but it's very stable, very big, very large. You can also add additional text in there as well if you wanted to add one that isn't there. Here we have Postgres, so which versions of Postgres are you using, if any. And Postgres the last few years, what we've seen is this is skyrocketing in terms of usage. We saw that with other surveys as well. Other surveys tend to be very developer focused or very focused on a certain demographic. We tend to get a lot of infrastructure folks who respond to our survey. So you're going to hear more from the DBAs, more from the people who are managing the infrastructure, so the back end side, the DevOps, the SRE folks. You do get some developers in there as well, but it's always interesting to see the trends on who's answering what. From a Mongo perspective, what versions of Mongo are you using, if any? And then, of course, there's a ton of other databases out there, and so we couldn't list an exhaustive list. It would take several pages. We tried to pick the most popular ones, and so if you're using any of these, feel free. Some of these, like Elasticsearch, you might be using OpenSearch now. They didn't have a release when we originally built this earlier this year. That was GA yet. They are GA now, so maybe next year that will end up as an alternative. But again, you can fill in things there as need be. And this one is super interesting for me. Okay, I added this one, I think a year and a half ago, or 2 years ago. I did a survey on our blog where we asked, where do you spend most of your time when working with databases? And it's so interesting to see those trends. For instance, nowadays, backup restores, operations, building new servers, the time isn't spent much there. A lot of it's spent in troubleshooting problems or query tuning or schema design, and it will vary from person to person. So, I mentioned, filling out kind of your basic role. Developers spend a lot more time, in that design aspect, whereas DBAs or SREs spend a lot more time in the troubleshooting and the query tuning aspect. So again, where are those trends happening? And as new technology evolves, as new features get released with some of these databases, how is that trending up or down? Are you using public cloud? Are you on-prem or hybrid? We often hear hey, cloud is eating everything, and we want to track that trend, see what's going on there. Is this happening for the database side as well? We asked some questions a little later on about Kubernetes. And so, you might be running Kubernetes in the public cloud, in the private cloud. You might be doing it in both. So you can check any one of these ones that makes the most sense. Which cloud companies are you using? So, whichever ones you're using, go ahead and you can fill those out. If you're using a database as a service, which vendors are you choosing their database as a service from? And, always interesting to see, especially some of the newer folks start to pop up. What's your top concern, with the cloud provider that you've chosen? So, this one we've seen over the last few years, that price increases, vendor lock-in, lack of flexibility, they kind of trade positions every year. And so it's always good to check in on what the cloud providers could potentially be doing better and what we should pay attention to. Now, in the last 12 months, how often have you upgraded database instances, added hardware to existing servers, or migrated to new hosting cloud providers? So one of the things that I'm really passionate about this year is talking about database design and why it matters. And there is a lot of wasted spend in infrastructure because of poor design decisions in both the application and in the database. And so, this is my attempt here to try and get more of that information out there to say, like, hey, in the last, year, we've had to continually upgrade our databases, whether it's on-prem or in the cloud, because, we just keep on, hitting the limits. And it is a trend that we do see where people start off one way and they end up spending way more. And that's why the next question is, coloring that a little bit. So even if you, say, wow, I had to upgrade more than 5 times my servers. So, keep on increasing the instance size, add more memory, whatever. The next one is, did you plan to do that? So some people plan that, hey, we're going to have all this accelerated growth. So if you can come in here and, say like, hey, I definitely did more than 4 times, but hey, it's about what I plan to spend anyways. That's going to tell us that, hey, you didn't get any surprises, so you kind of plan that out. But if we see a lot of people who are saying like, we way overspent and we had to upgrade all these times, that helps us to kind of like, say like, okay, why are they spending? Maybe we need to do some better, tooling. Maybe we need to do some better things on, educating, preaching on database design, database principles. How do we, make sure that people know how to get the most out of those systems and their spends? Always really important. Of course, containers, cloud native is super, super huge. So are you using containers for your database? Yes or no, or don't know. And it's okay to answer don't know. Does your company use Kubernetes internally for applications? This is a trend that is huge. We've got we're a member of the Data on Kubernetes community. We're a sponsor, and the growth there is phenomenal. So many companies looking at using Kubernetes because they want to run those databases like they're running their applications. And so we've got the question here. So you can say yes for just testing development, yes for production, no, not at all. Are you using Kubernetes just for your applications? And same thing for databases. How are you tracking, what's going on in the system? So when we talk about using database observability and monitoring and alerting, what are you, where are you deploying that software? Is it in the cloud? Are you using SaaS? Are you doing something else? This just helps us to kind of, track where vendors are, because, there's a lot. We love open source, and so we do a lot of open source ourselves, but sometimes the monitoring tools and the other tools, people are okay with the proprietary software or using cloud products, and they don't necessarily go open source for those, even if all of their databases are. So it's that kind of inflection point to see if there's a mix between proprietary and open source, or if it's just all purely open. Do you plan to migrate to a proprietary database to open source in the next 12 months? Let's be honest, we hear this all the time. So, always good to know if this is accelerating or slowing down. I think that as this increases the number of databases moving off of proprietary, you see more tools being developed by a lot of vendors, a lot of new open source products, if you will, start to be developed. to handle some of that migration work. Now, number 25 really is something that maybe is a bit near and dear to my heart. I'm really interested in people's feedback and what they're looking for from the license side, especially in the open source space. So when we look at a lot of companies like Elastic switching over to SSPL, or other companies maybe going AGPL, what sort of impact do you as a user feel that's going to have on your infrastructure? So, how will it impact the open source community? So is it going to have a big impact? Is it going to have a little? It's not a terribly detailed question there, but feel free to add stuff in the text box if you have some comments there. Maybe you don't care, so that's okay. A lot of people, I don't really care what the license is, but I am a big passionate proponent of open source, so I want to know, what do people think about the SSPL? How would you describe the adoption of open source databases by your company? Is it increasing, decreasing? Where's it going? Do you personally or as a company contribute? So do you have an open source program office? Is this something that you're passionate about contributing back? Most companies are users of open source, not necessarily contributors, especially on the database side. So it's always good to check in on that, see what's going on. Does your company mandate open source, or is it just a personal choice? Very different. We've seen some companies who it's a personal choice, and when that person leaves, all their infrastructure changes. It's an interesting trend to watch, because those are really expensive migrations potentially. But as new people come into an organization, a lot of times what will happen is their preferred database of choice, their preferred stack of choice becomes something that they want to bring along with them. What are compelling reasons for you to adopt more open source, right? So why do you like open source, right? Is it the security? Is it avoiding vendor lock-in? Is it ease of use, cost savings, the community? Which ones of these resonate with you? And feel free to put in others if you need. When it comes to your data, what keeps you up at night? Okay. Now, this one is interesting to look at, like with the next few questions. They kind of intertwine a bit. But we all have fears, right? And so as someone who's responsible for infrastructure, responsible for your databases, is the thing that worries you the most, or the things that worry you the most, is it high availability? Is it the performance issues, bad queries, staffing issues? I can't find people. Right, lack of resources, so I don't have the hardware or the capacity to run this. I don't have the budget. Budget fits into resources as well. What fears do you and your company have specifically with open source? So not everybody likes open source. There is a lot of information FUD in a lot of cases out there about, hey, you should be careful of this or that and the other thing. So are there things that worry you right now? So you've got that, what do you like, what don't you like? This one I like to use, 32, I like to use with number 30. So number 30 was, when it comes to your data, what keeps you up at night? 32 is, which of these database issues has your company experienced in the last 12 months? And so we ask this question because really what we want to understand is, are we worried about security, but we have no security issues? Are we worried about, performance issues, and we have performance issues all the time? Or is it a worry that is more of, hey, I just want to make sure that never happens? But the trends in this are often really interesting to look at, because you can look at things like this particular database, users had more performance issues. This particular cloud provider had more unexpected costs. So this kind of colors this whole rest of the information a little bit. It's really good for a pivot table. And so I like to do that. If there is an enterprise version, would you prefer to run it or to run the community version? if you have open source database software deployed, do you self-support or do you pay someone for support? And where do you get it? And if you were going to choose an enterprise version, what are the reasons? And then how likely are you to adopt different pieces of open source software based on how open the license is? This will be, we've done this question every year. And, obviously the more permissive, the more open it is, but looking at the deltas between these brackets is super interesting. That's the open source survey. 37 questions if you do the comment one at the end. I know it's a bit big, but we really do appreciate the help here, and a lot of folks in the community will use this information to help them do research, help choose directions for projects. So if you could help us out, help out the community, it would be great. Thank you very much. I appreciate you watching. Thanks for taking the survey.